providing us an halakhic overview of a problem I suppose has been with us since the beginning of time. The subject is taking the law into your own hands. Our first speaker this evening will be Rabbi Emanuel Quint. He's Dean and Rosh Kollel, a highly acclaimed author, having written a restatement of rabbinic civil law. 2 volumes are out. Volumes 3 and 4 are in the publisher's hands and will be out soon. Following a successful law practice in New York, Rabbi Quint made Aliyah in 1984. He may have thought he was coming here to retire, but he's busier than any 4 men that I know, which makes him just half as busy as his wife Rena. I could go on listing Rabbi Quint's academic, civic, humanitarian achievements and contributions, but rather than do that, I would like to conclude on a personal note by saying that next to my own father, who taught me as a boy growing up in Oklahoma, that's near Texas, he taught me how to hunt and fish and ride a bike and drive a car and other values by which to live. Next to my own father, I know no other man that I respect, admire, look up to, and love more than Rabbi Emanuel Quint. He's my teacher, he's my rabbi, he's my counselor, and he's my friend. And so it's with much joy that I introduce this evening Rabbi Emanuel Quint.
We have a tradition in Jewish life that the first thing we speak about are our hosts. Once again, very pleased to thank Larry Waxman, Menachem, and all of the officers and the committees of this magnificent congregation. I happen to be a member here too, and I'm very proud of it, for welcoming us again. Thank you very much. John High made it seem that all he does is receive. He gives more than he receives. Walk into the President Hotel where the Russians are. Walking in Shabbos morning, John is making kiddush for them. John and his charming wife Kathy take care of so many of the needs of the Russians. John didn't mention that there is a young family that they've taken under their wings. John didn't mention that he's also a karate expert, a black belt. And this young man, about 15 years old, who just arrived from Russia, I said, John, will you teach me karate? And John said, I'll teach you karate, provided I could also teach you how to put on tefillin, that I could also teach you how to come to shul and how to daven. And this young man does come, and he received an aliyah here in our shul on Shabbos morning. John didn't tell you that, but he does so much. And I think the most magnificent thing of all, he's the best newscaster we have in this country. And he's Mekadeh Shem Shomayim with his kippah as he announces the news. About a quarter of a century ago, I remember being in New York when someone showed me a new Talmud edition, as it were. And what did I think of it? I said, let me take it home and look at it. And I took it home, and I said, I stand in awe of the person who wrote this volume. And that was the first steinsalts Gemara, about a quarter of a century ago. Since then, many other volumes have come out. And I believe I'm correct when I say over 1 million copies have been sold. And I think, except for the Torah itself, and the Siddur, the prayer book, and possibly the Haggadah, which is used at the Pesach, I believe this is the best seller in any sefer in our history, besides for those 3. And what this did, it opened up something which was an enigma to many people. It opened up the Talmud to the masses in clear, lucid Hebrew translation, excellent notes and comments, and pictures, if you will. And now there are so many people who are studying Talmud who would not have dared had it not been for Rav Steinsalts. And now the English editions also are runaway bestsellers, more than Random House possibly could have anticipated. We pray that God gives you continued strength, Rav Steinsalts, good health and long life to continue your monumental work, and when you finish that, to get on to other works. For the last 3,500 years, the Jewish people has been a people governed by halacha, governed by law. The law governs us prenatal, post-burial, and everything in between. The halacha covers everything. And in civil law, the part of the code that deals with rabbinic civil law, Choshen HaMishpat, has 427 chapters covering all facets of civil law. And if you open up the Choshen Mishpat, chapter 1 deals appointment of judges to the Beis Din. Chapter 2 deals and has jurisdiction of the courts. Chapter 2 deals with exigency or emergency jurisdiction of the Beis Din. Chapter 3 deals with who shall be appointed as a judge, how many judges do you need? And Pitom, chapter 4, Jewish law deals with taking the law into your own hands. That seems to be a paradox. If we're governed by law all the time, all of a sudden being able to take the law into your own hands. By taking the law into one's own hands, the person who does so becomes the judge and the jury and the executioner of the judgments as he sees fit. And we know in law has to be, if there's a strife between people, it has to be decided by an impartial third party. And yet we have a person who he is now the decider of the law for himself. In addition to that, this person is an individual deciding law, and generally we know there's only one who can decide law by himself, and that's God Almighty. We have to have at least 3 people, sometimes 5 people should sit on a Beis Din. So here we have a system of law, and in the middle of all of that, we say you may take the law into your own hands under certain circumstances. And this is in derogation of everything that we know, that the law must be decided according to the law books and according to the judges. This evening I thought I would do just give a little bit of Talmudic background. Where does it come from whence that a person may take the law into his own hands? Because when you go to Beis Din, when you go to court, the first thing they tell you to do, can you settle this peacefully without having to engage our services? And if you cannot, it's mitzvah. So the court is suggesting to you, in fact urging upon you, may we mediate the dispute, and if we can't mediate, may we arbitrate, and only in the last instance will we decide this according to law. And yet over here we permit an individual by himself to take the law into his own hands. Whenever the Talmud, mostly when the Talmud has a complicated issue, it begins with a simple case. And the law of taking one law into one's own hands also starts with a simple case. And then the Talmud has 8 attendant cases, which discusses the first case and tries to prove one of 2 great sages correct or incorrect. The initial case deals with Reuben and Shimon own a well jointly, a well for water. The well does not have enough water to supply them both daily. So they made up. Reuben will draw water Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Shimon will draw water Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So one Monday, Reuben goes down to draw water, and he finds Shimon is drawing water from the well. He says, Shimon, will you please stop? This is my day. And Shimon says, make me. Reuben is not going to be intimidated, goes back to his tool shed, takes out a shovel, and he hits Shimon with the handle of the shovel. And he made him, so Shimon ceased. Shimon thereafter brings a lawsuit for assault against Reuben. The case comes before Rabbi, one of the great sages in Babylon, and he sends to even a person more experienced in civil law to Rav Nachman. He said, how should I decide this case? Rav Nachman said, you will dismiss the complaint of Shimon for assault, because not only could he have hit him once, he could have hit him 100 times in order to take the law into his own hands to protect his rights. So Reuben was vindicated in what he did. The Talmud brings a dispute between the same Rav Nachman and Rav Yehuda, under which circumstances may a person take the law into his own hands. Rav Nachman holding a person need never have to be troubled to go to Bezdin if he can self-help will work, while Rav Yehuda holds that only in those situations whereby waiting to go to Bezdin will there be irreparable loss to the person employing self-help. I once discussed this with my father, saint in memory, and he gave me an insight. He said, according to Rav Nachman, just going to court is vexatious enough, and therefore Rav Nachman holds the law can always be taken into one's own hands. Or Rav Yehuda holds going to court is not really so troublesome. But what we see from this leading case is that in the first instance, this is not a bidiyavad. If it so happens you took the law into your own hands, we will not undo it. The halacha says, in the very first instance, a person may take the law into his own hands, and he may even use sufficient force to get his way. And that is the main case, and with this simple case begins all of the discussion of self-help in the Talmud. As I said, there are 8 other cases. I'll discuss the 8 cases, not so much how it impacts upon whether Rav Nachman is right or Rav Yehuda is right, as the Talmud does, but just to show you the tenor of the cases to see what it's about. Shimon holds something that belongs to Reuben. He may have come to about it legally. For example, Shimon might have gone to Avis Rent-A-Car and rented a car for a week. The contract is over and he doesn't return the car. What may Avis do under the circumstances? That basically is the question. So one of the great sages in the Talmud, Ben Barbag, says that Avis may, under these circumstances, use force. In fact, it is preferable to use force than to steal the car back. They should go ahead, and if Shimon resists, as Ben Barbag puts it, break his teeth and get that car back, because you are entitled to it. There's no necessity for you to have to go to court. I was in the States about 3 years ago, and I went up to Yeshiva University to see a friend of mine who was the dean of the rabbinical college over there. And they happened to be learning in the Talmud this particular subject, and we were discussing it, and he told me an incident. Rabbi A, one of the greatest Talmudic sages, had just passed away. And my friend went with Rabbi B, a world-renowned authority, to the home of Rabbi A to pay a shiva call, to pay a condolence call. On the way out, Rabbi B took a sefer, a book off the shelf, and started to walk out with it. So the widow of Rabbi A said, "What are you doing?" "That's my husband's book." He said, "No, it's my book." And he walked out with it. And he based this on this very piece of Talmud, that a person may take that which belongs to him when he sees it, rather than having to go to adin to retrieve it. The Talmud, in another attendant case, discussing a situation where Shimon's ox mounts Reuben's ox, and Reuben's ox is in a precarious position. Reuben goes and yanks his ox from underneath Shimon's ox, and Shimon's ox falls and gets killed. Shimon now sues for the loss of his ox. And it was held, in this case, that Reuben is not responsible. He took the law into his own hands. But in reading the case, and the dicta of the case, and those words that don't impact upon the decision directly, but do impact upon our knowledge, had Reuben pushed Shimon's ox off the back of his own ox, then he might have been liable. So we see, in taking the law into your own hands, you have to try to minimize the damage that you're going to cause. And if you don't minimize the damage, you may very well be held liable. So this is the first caveat, the first warning. In taking the law into your own hands, there are certain restrictions and you have to be careful in certain ways. There are many cases in the Talmud in dealing with damages that deal with pottery. But if you go into the museums, you will see maybe 50% of the artifacts from those days that they have in museums of pottery. That was the best way to store things. So what happened was, Shimon, in the next case in the Talmud, stored his barrels on Reuben's property and blocked Reuben's access into his own house. Reuben couldn't get into his house, couldn't get out of the house because Shimon's barrels were in the way. What did Reuben do? He broke the barrels going out, he broke the barrels coming in. On the one hand, we could say from the prior case, we see that a person should minimize the damage. But here, to minimize the damage would have caused too much of a bother, picking up barrels and moving them. So the side of the law held, he did not have to do that, and he was free of any responsibility. But in a sweeping decision we see over here, that self-help can also be used to give me unrestricted movement on my own property. It is not only to retrieve an object or to save an object, I have unrestricted use of my own property, and therefore I can take self-help if it is threatened in order to be able to use my property. There are high rates of unemployment nowadays in many countries. Thank God we have it here, but we have it for good reason, because we're bringing in many, many wonderful people to our shores. But there are countries that are not bringing in wonderful people to their shores, and they have high unemployment. The Torah provides persons unemployed, he can become an indentured servant to a master and receive a certain amount of compensation, which he will work off during the next few years. There was such a situation where Reuben was the master and Shimon was the servant, and the term was over. Shimon, the former servant, did not leave the premises. Reuben said, "Please leave my premises," and Shimon didn't. So Reuben forcibly ejected Shimon from the premises, and in doing so, caused injury to Shimon. Shimon then sued Reuben for the assault. Here there was no threat. There was absolutely no threat. The former servant did not threaten his former master. But the Talmud says there was a psychological threat. Before there was a relationship between master and servant, and now they are both equal. The former servant doesn't anymore listen to the former master. So because of this psychological threat, the former master was able to use force, self-help as it were, in order to evict Shimon from his premises. Then the Talmud brings another case dealing with jars. Shimon was right, it was during the season when he was either jarring wine or oil, whatever it was, and he had a lot of extra jars, and he placed them in the street, and he blocked the streets. Reuben wanted to go down the street, and we said you can take self-help. There's no reason why you have to go around the block, as Tosafot said. He wanted to go straight. So he kicked the jars, but in doing so, he also broke his own toe. So now we have cross claims. Shimon is suing for the broken jars. Reuben is suing for a broken toe. And thank God no one's suing for a broken heart. But anyway, they're suing each other. It was held in this case. Shimon's case was dismissed because Reuben had the right to take the law into his own hands. So he had free access to the streets. But in doing so, he also took the risk of having a broken toe. And therefore, his complaint against Shimon was dismissed, because when you take the law into your own hands, you have to do it in such a way that if you are injured, you bear the responsibility, not the person against whom you took the law into his own hands. Then the Talmud brings another case. Reuben and Shimon are having a fight, a physical fight, not just a psychological fight. And Reuben's wife, Sarah, in order to help her husband, grabs hold of Shimon where she should not have, in a way that she should not have, in a place where she should not have. It ended the fight, but began a lawsuit. Because Shimon now sues Reuben's wife, Sarah, for indecent act being perpetrated upon him. It was an indecent assault upon him. And therefore, Shimon says that I want to be compensated for the embarrassment that this indecent assault caused to me. The case came before the Bezdin, and Bezdin had to decide the reasonable man doctrine, or woman doctrine, at that time. Did she do the right thing, or could she have saved her husband without an indecent assault? That was the case that Bezdin had to decide. I know on the way out, everyone's going to ask you what happened in this case. But we see that in using self-help, can it be done in a way that does not offend the sensibilities and does not cause so much harm to the person against whom it was perpetrated? In addition to this, we see that self-help is not a doctrine only for men. It is also a doctrine for women. A woman can also take the law into her own hands. If you recall in our first forum, it seems like ages ago, I spoke about the role of the woman in the Bezdin system as a plaintiff, as a defendant, as a lawyer, as possibly a witness, what the roles could be, and as a judge, the various things. So we see that there is a role for the woman in the system, and in the self-help, there is definitely a role for the woman. The seventh case given in the Talmud discusses a situation where Reuben has a wide open field, and the people have been cutting across his field to get to the other side as a shortcut. Reuben decided he wanted to build. And a very similar case happened here 15 years ago in Katamon. And this case was decided by the Badatz, by the Torah Bezdin, by Rabbi Weiss, as a matter of fact, wrote a tshuva, almost identical to this Talmudic case. So he wanted to stand there and tell people, you cannot cut across my field. And in the meantime, he gave them another road. To the side of his field, they should use that. And the Talmud held both roads to be used by the public. The second road, because it was dedicated to the public. The first road, because it would be inconvenient for the people who lived closer to the shortcut not to have to go to the other road. The inference in the Talmud being, had there not been inconvenience, that the person, Reuben, whose field they were using, could have taken a baseball bat, stood at the end of the field, and kept everybody out of the field. It was only because there was a long way around for the people, but otherwise, he could have used self-help against a community. So self-help, we see, is not only against an individual. If a person is right, he can use self-help even against a community. And the last case in the Talmud also deals with self-help against the community. We just read in the Torah that if I am a farmer and if I've have a field, I have to leave the edge of my field. I will not harvest that. I leave that for the poor. That is called payah. Reuben, in this case, left the eastern end of his field as payah. The people didn't want to go to the eastern end of the field. For whatever reason, they went to the western end of the field. The outcome of this case was that only the western end where the people were was payah. That if Reuben wanted, he very well could have stayed at the eastern end of the field with that same baseball bat and prevented the people from going across his field. So we see from the various cases that the Talmud recognizes the right to self-help. It recognizes it as an inherent right in the individual to take the law into his own hands in certain instances, in the first instance, and even employ force. This is just the beginning. There are many ramifications. One of the ramifications discussed in chapter 4, dealing with self-help, is can a person invoke the jurisdiction of the Gentile courts in order to effect self-help? Chapter 26 of Choshen Mitzvah tells us, except for rare instances, we cannot invoke the Gentile courts. And by Gentile courts, I'm not talking about the courts in this country, the civil courts, though we have, one of the great rabbis said, you'd rather try a case, if a person had to go to a court, he should really go to a court, say, in the United States or in any country, but not before the courts over here. He said, these have a law of our but that's not a universal opinion. But to invoke the Gentile courts is something that under certain circumstances can be done in the furtherance of self-help. Self-help, I've been discussing, according to Talmudic cases, only deals with the rights of an individual to effect self-help. But a community also has the right to self-help. Very often the Jewish community was given a lump sum tax to pay by the secular rulers, by the king or the governor of the state where they were residing. And they had to raise this tax internally. And those people, unfortunately, were evading taxes or claimed by justification not to pay the taxes. So the community, in order to get fast relief, would invoke self-help. That they would go ahead and seize money from the tax evader or seize property of his. So we see there are many ramifications in self-help. There is a certain instance in the Talmud where self-help seems to be the only method. That is, both Reuben and Shimon claim a certain article. For example, just recently there was a sunken ship in Lake Erie, I think it is, or Lake Ontario, and it's being decided by the courts of Canada under treasure trove laws. And two people each claim that ship, and neither one has dominion over it. So the court will say, who can prove the case? If they both have equal proof, or if neither one can prove it, the court will say, let the stronger person prevail. And that is also an instance of self-help. There is a prohibition in the Torah when self-help may never be used, and that is in the case of a loan. If the borrower, at the time when the loan is made, does not put up collateral security, never, never, never may the lender by himself go and take collateral security, to seize collateral security from the borrower. That he cannot do. I just want to cite two recent cases that came before probably the greatest decisor of law of our times, Moshe Feinstein. He had many cases, and a lot of the other rabbis have many cases, but just two cases we see 20th century and 20th century cases. In one case that happened in Toronto, there were two shofatim, ritual slaughterers. And they had a thriving business, and they wanted to also take in a third party, and he would manage the slaughterhouse on the other end of Toronto. So they took in a man called Michael. They signed a partnership agreement, various terms, After about 3 years, Mikhail writes a letter to his two partners, stating, number one, you're cheating on me. You're not reporting all of the income. Number two, you're selling meat cheaper to relatives of yours. And number three, you're all lazy, so you put on a lot of other people on staff, and I am paying for it. So, and also when they started the business, they took a substantial loan from the bank. And since Mikhail lived near the bank, they gave him the proceeds to pay the checks, to pay the monies to reduce the loan. Mikhail invoked self-help. He said, since you're cheating on me, I will take some of the money, instead of putting it into the bank, I'll put it into my bank account. When they found that out, so everybody wrote to Rabbi Feinstein for advice. The case did not hinge upon self-help because he indicated self-help could have been done in this case. It hinged upon partnership law. Since they were partners and the agreement provided that 2 out of 3 partners can decide matters, so the other 2 partners decided to run the business this way. But had that not been the case, the person who took the money and pocketed it might very well have been able to invoke self-help in this case. Then there was in Brooklyn, a famous Hasidic rabbi died, and there were big fights amongst those people close to him, wife, son, friends, brothers, others, as who would become the next rabbi. But it wasn't only a matter who would be the next rabbi. There was a congregation, the main congregation, subsidiary congregations, there were schools involved, there were funds involved for Gemilas Chesed. There was a lot involved over here. And Rabbi Feinstein didn't really want to answer this one, not because he didn't want to answer it, because the person who had inquired of him, there was a letter being circulated attacking Rabbi Feinstein because of a prior decision he gave in this case, and it had the name of the person signed on that letter who made the inquiry of Rabbi Feinstein. So first he said, the letters you write about me doesn't bother me. And on top of that, I don't even believe that you did it. But if you did do it, I think in this case it's not a case for self-help, except since the Hasidim have to know whom to turn to, you may use self-help in acquiring the name and going into the Beit Knesset, going into the synagogue, and taking control of the synagogue. As far as everything else is concerned, it should be worked out according to the best. So we see that self-help is something that can be done in the very first instance. You may use force, but you better be right, because there will be judicial review. The person against whom you use self-help, he can go to Bezdin, and he may sue you if you overstep your bounds, and you will be responsible. So in using self-help, there are certain caveats, certain warnings. Number one, make sure you are halakhically correct. Number two, don't contravene the law of the land which you're living. There may be the law of the land, and Rabbi Steinsalts and I had discussed it about a year ago, Dina Mafute Dina. And that is, while self-help may let you go in and take something that you think belongs to you, or does belong to you, the law of the land may say you cannot do that because you may be indicted for a robbery or for stealing. But most importantly, when a person uses self-help, he has now become the sole judge, and we should really know that there is only one sole judge. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi Quinn. Our next speaker has been described as the leading rabbi of this century. I don't know about you, but to introduce, I think rightfully so, someone like that is just a little bit intimidating for me. Rabbi Adin Steinsalts is Rosh Hashiva, head of the Israel Institute for Talmudic Publications. In 1988, he opened the Judaic Studies Center in Moscow, recipient of the Israel Prize for Lifetime Achievement. Born in Jerusalem, 1937. He's a rabbi, a scholar, a teacher, a mystic, and a whole lot more. True story. Years ago, when I first became interested in Judaism and started studying, one of the very first books I bought was this same book right here. The Essential Talmud by Adin Steinsalts. Not in my wildest dreams would I ever have imagined the privilege of meeting the man, much less standing in Jerusalem and being given the honor of introducing Rabbi Steinsalts. As Rabbi Quinn said, he's currently involved in this monumental task of producing the Talmud, the Steinsalts edition. We've got a work that here before was mainly the domain of the rabbis and the sages. And along comes Rabbi Adin Steinsalts, who makes this available to people like me. The richness, the fullness, the beauty of the Talmud. It is with a great deal of honor that I introduce this evening Rabbi Adin Steinsalts.
Usually I promise myself that after being introduced so many times, I become just immune to it, ignoring everything and treating it as mere drivel, as it is. But it is still slightly, how to put it, uncomfortable. So ignore everything said, and we'll begin from the very beginning. The question that Rabbi Quinn began with is he gave quite a number of instances of self-help, all kinds of cases, some of them commonplace cases. And some of them, you may say, are stories in the Talmud, and you don't happen to have your way blocked by pieces of pottery. Incidentally, what you may have to do, which happens far more frequently now, is when some car stops your way, and then you have to find out how to get out, and can you hit the other car when you are moving out? Now, you see, this question is not so bizarre as it seems. If you just don't think about pots and pottery, then it becomes a very common problem that possibly everybody encountered once or twice. And the question whether to call the police or to wait until the nice good man will move his car or to do something similar is quite a question, and the temptation to do some damage, just not even to help you, but at least to get some of your feelings expressed in the proper way is a huge temptation. So the problem is far more common than it really sounds to be. It's very, very, very common. And in fact, we encounter problems like this every day in our life. We don't usually begin to think about it legally. One has to be a lawyer, and possibly a bad-natured lawyer at that, to begin to think legally about every case like this. I mean, when you are on a queue and somebody is pushing his way in or out, then you have exactly the same problem. When you have to go through a crowd, when you have to do a great number of things, not to speak about what happens between neighbors and so on. Now, let me just read you two more cases in which these things become quite practical. see, usually when one thinks about the law, one thinks about civil law in the sense of money law. But civil law is not only money law, and our law, the Jewish law, is so involved, interconnected between the civil law, the religious law are so interconnected that you can't really divide them. But let me give you a very simple case, which is even more common than the case of say having your way blocked somewhere on a parking lot. You are, let's say, you are at your home with your own family, and you have a child. And the child is misbehaving. Now, what should you do? Now, it may be, I mean, if you are, as I happen to be married to a psychologist, then the answer is keep quiet, smile, and pretend as if nothing happened. Now, incidentally, it's not such a big secret, that doesn't always apply to my wife. When she comes to such a case, possibly because she has no psychologist to stop her, she behaves slightly differently. But let me put it legally. Let's say that I am doing what I advise many other people to do. See, if a child is misbehaving, slap it. Now, the point is that slapping any person, and that includes a child, it includes one of your children as well as any other child. There is no real, the only person that has the right by law to flog, to hit, to beat other people, by law invested in it, is what I call the person that does so on behalf of the court. There is what I call shliach adin, the person that is what I call the executioner, and he used to flog the people according to the judgment of the judge. If you do damage to any person, he's a Jewish person, that is something that is against the law, and that is breaking what I call one thing. It breaks what I call mitzvat lo ta'aseh, a negative commandment, which one has no right to hit another person. More than that, you are liable for damages, and any person that you hit can sue you for damages, for the shame, for the pain, for anything that has been involved in it. So you can be sued. Sometimes you are, for that thing, you have to pay. Sometimes, according to the law, especially if it is less than the amount that is payable, you may be flogged. And flogging at the time was a very painful experience, really very painful. People died of flogging. So the point is that doing any bodily damage to anybody, and as I'm saying, there is no right, there is no point of what I call it, a person, a parent, has a property right over his children. They don't belong to him. A slave may belong to him, partially. His animals belong to him, but his children do not belong to him. So he has no right to hit them. But, in fact, what he is doing is that he is acting at a time, potent, what they call is some kind of a shliach adin. He is theoretically appointed by the court to correct the child because he is commanded to take care over the education of the child, and so he has to behave in the right way in doing so, and so he has the right to take the law into his own hands and to do the punishment that he thinks is right and fit. Incidentally, there is in Shulchan Aruch, in Yoredeah, and elsewhere, there are rules how it should be done. And for example, because it is a point of law, if it is done in anger, it's not only not psychologically sound, but it is possibly not right halachically. So the child may sue his father or his mother for slapping him, putting him to shame, causing him harm, and so on, whatever it is, because that was done. It is not within the rights of the parents to do so. So the question, something like this, becomes again a real problem of taking the law into your hands. Because what you do there is that you are possibly on one hand, you have not only a right, but you have a duty for education. On the other hand, you have no right to do any damage. So you have to move, to maneuver between these things, which is not by any means easy. It's not easy, but it is a part of the same problem. So as I said, the problem is a very common one. It doesn't sound always, when you put it on what we call it in legal generalized terms, sometimes you never happen to have a case like this. But at home, you may have hundreds of cases like this, and you encounter them again and again and again, and you have to find ways of how to deal with it. But let me go from that, just pointing out that the whole notion is not exceptional, to two basic problems involved. One problem is, there is a law. Should there also be a judge? I'll put it this way. Rabbi Quinn began by saying that we are involved with law, which is true. We have so many laws that govern everything that we do. More laws than people know about, and there are laws that people love to ignore. I mean, there are lots of laws, not only some bizarre subsections in some forgotten book, but some basic laws that people tend to forget. But still, there are lots of laws that govern our life. Now, all these laws are things that we are supposed to do. Do we have to go to court? So the basic question is, in a way, is going to court a necessary way of doing things, or is it just a practical way of doing it? Should I go to the court to make a decision? Because, first, I'm not sure, and mainly because I'm not powerful enough to achieve the results. See, if I want to take somebody's, say, property, for example, I cannot always do so because he may be too tough for me. So I invoke the help of society, or I invoke the help of the court to help me. If so, the real basic question is, am I obliged at all to go to court? Is going to court preferable than doing things on my own? Basically, it's a basic thing. Should I go to court? Let's say that I have a court nearby, that the court sits in the next room and I can always enter. I know that there are people that are now in our times trained that if they have to buy an undershirt, they have to go to ask the rabbinical opinion about it, and possibly get also a hair shirt. But the question is it a kind of a necessity that one has to do? I have to go to the court. I have to get an opinion. Or is it a kind of a way of, so to say, it's a shortcut. It's a shortcut, or it's a convenience. Now, this is really the very basic question that we have to discuss in it, is can one move without an order of the court? Or is the court just a way of helping me to make the right decisions? in a way, I may say, when I came and I asked the court, and they gave me their decision, now I have the responsibility really lies on them. In fact, the whole notion of cross-rule is in a way taking my responsibilities, giving them to the court, and let the court deal with it. I'm just becoming a vehicle and a tool in the hands of the court, and I don't make any decisions. So the real question is, rather, is the old judicial system a necessity? I mean, I should have judges. Well, I don't have to have judges. I don't have to have judges. Now, the question, Rabbi we hinted about, the question whether one has to make a decision or to make a compromise is internally connected to the same problem. Should one, when I make a compromise, it usually means that both sides didn't get what is their due. One side won something that doesn't belong to him, and the other side got something that lost something that belonged to him. But in many cases, it's a convenience. It saves time, it saves trouble, it saves many other problems when they can somehow decide the thing and finish it fast. But the question is, should I follow justice, law in general, or can I do? And again, one speaks about going to the court, and the court tells me to compromise, or the court will make some kind of a compromise. If I'm doing it on my own, in fact, I'm judging also. I'm making a judgment, and I decide who has the rights and who hasn't the rights. Now, my decision may not be correct, but it is a decision. I can do it because I can give money, because I can take money, but this is what I call the legal backing of it. But what is morally, should one go to court? Everywhere, every time, where you have just the opportunity, go and ask what has to be done and follow up. See, the question about what's called Yikov adin et ahar, let justice cut through the mountain, is the idea that I don't care. I want to have absolute truth. And absolute truth is for me, but possibly not for the court. But for me is, I got a court decision, now I am sure about what I have to do. So the question, that is in many ways a very basic question, which goes about not only what if I am allowed to do things on my own, but is it a preferable way, or is it just a way that I'm doing only under duress? See, the cases that Rabbi quoted were cases in which I really don't have the time to go to court. I am losing something that something irreversible may happen if I go to court. One of those cases, for example, is a case again of people taking a shortcut. The basic law is that when people have established the right of way, the owner really cannot do anything about it. The owner cannot take the way from them, and he has to make some agreement with the people whether they will a good community or more other people will agree for closing such a road. They may be compensated for it. Now let's imagine that it comes to another case. I'm standing in a way. I'm in my field, and I see that somebody is going to make a shortcut. Now, if he will do the shortcut, he will create a small path. After he will come his son, his sister, his brother, his friend, and then all of them will make a shortcut. After some time, I won't be able, not only practically, but even legally, I won't be able to do anything about it. So what should I do at the first time when the first person comes, or when the first people come, and they want to establish a right. Now, in such a case, of course, I may go to the court, and I may receive an order from the court, and I may even hang this order on the border of my say of my rooms or my field, and the people may also ignore it as it happens. Now, if I will wait until everything will be settled, then I may find out that I lost everything, and it became an irreversible situation. So in such cases, I have to make a move. But should I always wait for it? Now let me bring, and jumping back again, to a question, which is again a very general question. No, there is something when individuals take the law into their hands. There are also cases in which communities take the law into their hands. And one of these questions is, take a question which is a very common problem all over the world, and that is called war. What is war? War is when a people takes the law into its own hands. Now the question is, should one wait for the UN to make a decision? Even though, as for impartiality and for other reasons, and think about the people sitting there, it should be surely not the right call. But let's say, should you wait until somebody else makes a decision, or you may go to war? Now there is the question of war is a big problem. Is small. That's just an enlargement of the small question of self-help. Should I go to war? Have I the right to go to war? Or should I ask for a decision? Now, the Jewish law, for example, makes a difference between, it's called Milchemet Reshut and Milchemet Mitzvah. War that is called forced upon me, and war that I make by choice. More than that, war that I declare because I want. In those times, it was still considered at least legal and possible. I want to enlarge my borders. Now, only war. There are two laws about these wars. The war that comes, which is what's called Milchemet Reshut, has indeed to have a legal decision. The rulers of the country cannot declare war. They need the Great Sanhedrin as the only body that can make the decision, a legal decision, that one has to declare war. But when there is a war that is forced upon me, then I don't have to ask the Great Sanhedrin, and I don't have to ask what their opinion is, but the king or whoever the ruler of the country is, declares war and has all the force and power to force everybody to such a war. So this is again the question of self-help versus going to court. Should I go to court or should I not go to court? And let me go from this case of the courts to something that seems to be the real basic notion there. We have a notion about, which is the only justification for war, for defensive war at least, and for defense. And that goes to the expression that if somebody comes to kill you, you can anticipate him and kill him, even before death. So that is what one would call the general right of self-defense. Now, the right of self-defense is clearly a case in which I take the law into my hands. I take the law into my hands. And self-defense seems to be also the root of all those small laws that deal with taking the law into my hands. It seems that, and that is something that should be in many ways followed, because it is possibly also a very, very important moral question. See, the idea that if somebody attacks you, I have the right to protect myself by any means available and do it to the best of my ability. That means there is some kind of inherent justice in that, in self-defense. And this inherent justice doesn't need any kind of a special court decision. I may be mistaken, but it doesn't need any kind of a special decision to allow me to do so. Now, it seems that possibly contrary to the idea of giving my second cheek, which I think is not only giving the second cheek to be bitten, is not only I don't consider it a superior moral position, but I think it's a very inferior moral position, because it gives creates a world in which one somehow has, if not the right, at least he has the ability to hit me. And the question whether it is me or somebody else doesn't really matter in this case, because justice has to be done, and therefore the fact that I'm the person attacked doesn't really count in that consideration. The question would be, what is justice and how can justice be made? Now, in this case, it means that the general role of keeping justice in the world, keeping things in the proper way, is really not the duty of the courts or the duty of the policeman. The police is just a way of doing some of these jobs. They are being delegated, but not by the courts as such, but by the people as such. They are the hand of the people, as the army is another kind of the hand of the people, that has to deal with the point of doing what is right and just, which is a duty of everybody. Now, I'm putting possibly things upside down, because putting it this way, I would say that the duty of keeping law, order, justice, and other things is a very general law and ruling that lies upon each of us. The fact that I am the injured party doesn't mean that I don't have the right to do justice if I happen to be the injured party. That's what I'm saying about giving a second cheek. The fact that I'm the person beaten doesn't make me less justified in making somebody that beats other people regret it. So I have as one of not only my rights, but it goes much further. It goes into something that I would call, it is a duty that lies on everybody to keep what I call v'asita hayashar v'atov, to do the good and the just. And that is something that lies upon everybody. Not the courts are, again, means of achieving it, as the policemen are means of achieving it. They are trying to keep it within an orderly way. But the basic order is not created again by the police, but it's created by the law. the law is creating what we call the rule, and we have to act according to that rule. We may, for all kinds of reasons, delegate this duty, but basically that's the duty that lies on each of us. And again, the fact that I'm the party involved doesn't make me less of doesn't make it less of an obligation for me to fulfill that basic order of keeping justice done. Makes, and here comes what we call the court. I have inherently to keep justice. Self-defense is a part of it. Incidentally, it's the same thing. What happens if I see a person pursuing somebody else in the order to commit to assault him? Now I have the duty to defend the person. I don't go to the courts, but I have the right to defend that person and to do it to the best of my abilities. In fact, it seems that there's a strange situation that the person that does so is also immune from any kind of legal suit against any damages that he caused in the meantime while he tried to save somebody. So he's in a way, he's acting for the power of justice done. Now what happens if I am the person pursued? The only thing that happens is that I'm biased. And because I am biased, I may act improperly. So the question of going to the court is not to get from them the permission to act. It is rather to ask the opinion whether that action I am taking is the right action, because I have good reason to suspect myself of doing something that won't be correct. And the basic notion that the advice, don't be a sole judge, because there is only one sole judge, only one judge who can rule alone. It comes from the same problematic, which is not that I don't trust a single person, but I say any single person may be at that moment biased. When I take three people who may not be as wise as one single person, but still, being three, I have a better chance of having what we call an unbiased ruling. It doesn't happen always, but it still there is a better chance. A single person is always suspected, justly so, of having, in many cases, making what we call mistakes by his idiosyncrasies, by his special likes and dislikes, by all kinds of other things, and more so when he is personally involved. So the point of going to, of what we call, of self-help is really, theoretically I can do everything. But that case, I'm open for charges. I may do something that was wrong. If I'm wrong, then I'm liable also to pay all the damages that happened during that process. If I made just a wrong judgment. So the real question about going to the court is I have to find out not whether I have a right to act, but whether my judgment was the right judgment. In a certain way, I am not only becoming the delegate of the big deal. I'm working under that duty of keeping justice done. But in order to keep a certain kind of orderly behavior, I have to do it within a system. And the system, the court system, the legal system, is really the system in which those things will be put within a framework, but not because there is an inherent right that lies in the code. So if we come there, so if I'm coming back, jumping back into the case, what happens if my child misbehaves? The basic judgment should be whether to slap the child or not is whether I would do so to somebody else's child. That is the basic, because if something has to be rectified, I have the same right of doing it. I cannot see something unjust being done without, so to say, interfering. I'm trying to put it in a much larger scale, which is possibly our people were blamed for it forever, but still I think that it is not such a bad habit. The basic idea that the duties of justice and mercy lie upon every individual are so very basic that delegating them is always a question. It has to be done with a great amount of thinking what to delegate, and it doesn't mean that I am myself, after I have given it to the hands of somebody else, that I am now completely free of all responsibility. The idea, the individual responsibility to justice is something that lies upon each of us. And to say something in an even more general way, the idea, which is our promise that we made before receiving the law, we have to say yes. When we said Na'aseh V'Nishma, we'll hear and obey. It wasn't about the Ten Commandments. We didn't know what is in the Ten Commandments. But we said yes to something that was very singular. And that was, which I think is the kind of a definition of our existence, is V'atem tiyu li mamlechet kohanim v'goy kadosh. You shall be unto me a kingdom of priests. Now that means, in a very simple way, that each of us is becoming a king and a priest. And he undertook this position of being a king and a priest. That is, incidentally, one of the reasons why so many of the prophets didn't like the idea of having kings. Because Mamlechet Kohanim means a kingdom of kings. And that's what they say in the Midrash Rabbi and other Midrashim about it. It's being kings and priests. So, in some of those duties are delegated by law. But still, it's the basic notion that each of us is a priest. And therefore, as you know, when it comes to prayer, you don't have to find somebody special. Every person can be what they call a shliach tzibur, and he can pray for the people, and we don't have to wait for the rabbi to open the heaven for you. In the same way, the idea of being a king means that doing justice is a duty upon all of us. We may, in some cases, again, because we are, everybody knows that is one of the biggest problems of Israel. When you have here close to 5 billion kings in one small country, it becomes a very ungovernable place as it is. But still, basically, the idea that in a way, it causes lots of trouble, it causes lots of inconvenience, but it comes from the notion that upon each of us lie all these duties. And because we have all these duties, as individuals and as a people, we have to act upon them. So So the question, in a way, should go, even though I know that Rechte, the Russian Mishpat, that deals with civil law, and many others, they are basically dealing with law and courts of law, and dealing with courts and baby, and there are rabbis, and there are rabbis above rabbis, and there are courts and all other things. But basically, as I say, if we take what I would call it basic law is, if it could be done, every person should be learned, if not like Moshe Rabbeinu, but at least like Yoshua ben Nun, at least. So this is our duty. If we don't fulfill it, it's our fault, but it's our duty. So we should know the law. So we should know how to act. We have also the power to act. Now, as it isn't always so, because we are biased, we try to find ways and means in order to keep it. Because some people are too lazy, some people are too hasty, and everybody is not a fair judge of himself. But as I say, that goes into the order that is established above it. But the basic, when we come to what we call the very basic concepts of law, it seems that the very basic concepts are that the religious duty as well as the legal duty lies first and foremost upon the individual. The duty and the power. Some of it is, so to say, taken, but not completely and entirely. There are always some remnants of that power that remain even within the structure. For example, to give just one example about another part of it, which is very like that part about taking the law into your own hands. There was a time between the temples, between the so to say the destruction of the temporary temple in Shiloh and the creation of the temple in Jerusalem. That was the time in which everybody was what was called permitted to make sacrifices. At that time, every householder was a priest. You didn't need any special priests, because the idea that you have the right to make a sacrifice lies within your own personality, because you are a Jew. So because you are a Jew, you are also a priest. Some of this glory is taken from us, so to say, and given in the usual way to the tribe of the priests. But basically, let's say, the basic nature of us is still, we are a kingdom of priests. And because of that, from that we derive both our holiness and also our obligation. So in a certain way, I'll put it, again, it's possibly very, very worst advice to say in this country. I rely on that most of you are not living here permanently, not yet. So, see, the idea of looking at what is happening at the neighbor's house, meaning watching about law and order, is not such a bad habit. Everybody complains about it, but it has something which is not only a point of closeness, but also the point of duty of keeping things in some kind of a way. The idea of trying to keep order doesn't lie only on the protocol, on the official forces. And the idea of keeping justice doesn't lie within the judges. Let me just put it. This delegation of power, that means that we have basically, we have that inherently, we have that power. And we should never give it completely away. So that power is there. We should use it wisely. And as you heard before, if a person acts on his own behalf, illegally, he is apt to get hit by the law. But that will be true also if he acts legally on the advice of his best lawyer, or he acts illegally on the advice of a mistaken court. That will also not be a complete defense. So the idea of keeping what I call the law, doing it on my own, is may create lots of havoc, and it cannot be done practically. But the basic idea is that justice lies upon the people. Holiness lies upon the people. The duties, including for welfare and other problems, lie upon the people. And it lies on each of us. And from there, we derive our ability to act on our own. We have to do it advisedly, guardedly, in every time we make judgment for ourselves. But that goes on. Let me go to a case that's even more common than slapping one's child. See, there are couples, and even though marriage is practically a mutual company for mutual abuse, as you know. Let me just add that there is no property involved. The idea that one may say anything to his wife and vice versa, whatever it happens, lies basically with the same notion that in fact, one has no right not to beat his wife, and even not to offend her any more than he has to do so with somebody else's wife. He has exactly the same right. The fact that they are married doesn't allow him a better or greater right, and vice versa. If the wife wants to abuse her husband, she may do so only in one case. Using those rights is not the wrong thing. But we have to know that we are now using the power invested in us as those that have to keep law and justice in the world. And so whatever we do on our own, we have to be very careful not to be biased by anger, by self-interest, by other things. But still, the duty basically lies on us. We can give some of it to others, but we should remember it lies upon us. And from there we can delegate it to other bodies, to other parts, but still, it is still within us and for us to act upon it.
I want to thank each and every one of you for coming. Mark on your calendars. Our next forum in English will hold Hamoed Pesach. Hope to see you then, God willing.